I'm not looking for trouble with you, Marshal. It's Jerry here has got me all riled up, him and that girl.
I don't know. But I'll tell you something, Doc. You better not mess around with Nades there.
Sir Ken Curtis is a name that will always be tied to Gunsmoke's famous character Thesis, the rough-looking deputy from the country who has a great heart and a smart mind. With his warm, real, and natural acting, he won over millions of hearts on screen, becoming one of the most beloved characters in the history of classic Western TV. Even so, Ken Curtis's real life was not at all like the characters he played. In spite of his friendly smile, he had been holding a grudge, being let down, and having personal problems for a long time. Not many people know that before he died, Ken Curtis told people which 6 artists he thought were the meanest he had ever worked with. The people who touched him so deeply that he would never forget them even after he died. Today's video will reveal those shocking facts, look into where these disagreements really came from, and explain why Ken Curtis chose to speak out in the end. But before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like Ken Curtis or old Western movies. That way you won't miss any more interesting stories like this. Ken Curtis was born on July 2, 1916 in the small town of Lamar, Colorado. His real name was Curtis Wayne Gates. His life was very different from most kids his age and very different from the bright lights of Hollywood. To be exact, Ken grew up in a jail. Dan Gates, his father, was the sheriff of Bent County. As part of his job, the family had to live in a small apartment right above the jail. Ken's playground was made up of cold iron bars, the sound of footsteps echoing down long hallways and the heavy clang of cell doors closing. Other kids played on grassy fields. Noel Sneed Gates, his mother, worked as a cook in the jail. She took care of her family and also cooked food for the prisoners. Ken saw her put food through the bars a lot, which gave him an early look into a world that not many kids see. Those events made a lasting effect on him. He had memories that stayed with him all his life. Ken Curtis was always good at the arts, especially singing, even when he was very young. During the Great Depression, though, realism often won out over passion. Ken went to Colorado College because his folks told him to. He wanted to become a doctor because it would be a stable job with a good future. He tried to stay on that road for a while, but he knew in his heart that he wasn't meant to be a doctor. He kept hearing the call of music, which led him back to what he really loved. Ken took a big risk when he quit medical school after 2 years to follow his dream of becoming a singer. It was a bad idea. It had been a long time since the Great Depression, and now World War II was coming. Still, his leap of faith started to pay off, even though the odds were against him. Ken's first big break came when Tommy Dorsey asked him to sing in his group in the early 1940s. Dorsey was already a giant in the music world and led one of the most famous bands in the country at that point. Soon after Frank Sinatra left, Ken joined the group, a very hard act to follow. But Ken quickly won over people with his smooth, rich voice and natural stage charm. It was during this time that Dorsey told him to drop his real name, Curtis Wayne Gates, and go by the fake name Ken Curtis. It is short, strong, and great for show business. As soon as he got that new name, his career really took off. Ken found his true home in Western music after making a name for himself in big bands. He became the lead singer of the famous Western band Sons of the Pioneers, who had a lot of fans and a lot of hit songs. Ken's warm, heartfelt singing brought timeless hits like Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky to life. These songs became symbols of the golden age of Western music. Few fans know that Ken also held a 15-minute radio show in the late 1940s called Chuck Wagon Jamboree, which was based in Los Angeles and aired all over the country. Ken sang Western songs, acted funny skits with a group of comedians called the Novelty Aces, and ended each show with a hymn. The show ran for about 2 years and had over 130 episodes. This one-of-a-kind mix of music and stories would later help shape the warm, friendly character that people loved on screen. Ken wasn't happy with just being a singer, though. Because of his natural personality and ease of charm, new doors began to open for him, this time in Hollywood. Ken had publicly switched from acting to singing by the late 1940s and early 1950s. Taking part in Western-themed shows and cowboy movies, each role he played helped him build what would become a long-lasting Hollywood career. Even though he was famous and successful, Ken Curtis once said there were 5 people in Hollywood he really didn't like. People who did things that hurt him and made him remember things for the rest of his life. Ken Curtis put a name at the very top of his list that many people might not have expected. John Mantelli, who made Gunsmoke himself. There is no Hollywood rumors or gossip about their fight. It's very real, and it broke the calm, family-like picture that Gunsmoke fans had long held of the set. It was said that Mantley was a perfectionist who controlled output with accuracy and power. The budgets and scripts he used were very strict, and players who wanted to add their own ideas were not allowed to. But Ken Curtis never kept quiet. At that point, his Pheezus character had become the show's heartbeat. A fan favorite, whose wit and warmth carried some of its most memorable moments. Curtis thought Pheezus deserved a bigger part, and that he should get paid more to match how famous Pheezus was. But Manty didn't agree. Small differences about the direction of the project quickly turned into full-on fights behind closed doors. Later, other crew members would talk about how tense it was, and how the air seemed to get tighter whenever the two men were in the same room. Curtis pushed for Pheezus to become more than just a rough-edged sidekick. He wanted him to be a more important and complicated figure in Dodge City. Mantley, who was always in charge, thought that Gunsmoke was his idea and that no player should try to change it. One of the few real fights on the Gunsmoke set was their ongoing power battle. Not just quiet chatter in the changing rooms, but anxiety that everyone could feel. Behind the scenes, the split between Ken Curtis and John Mantelli never really healed, even though both men put on a professional front for the cameras. Second is James Aries, who was the show's big star. For 20 amazing years, James Aries played Marshal Matt Dillon, the personification of justice in Dodge City. He was in every scene and every story. A lot of people watched Gunsmoke because of him. He was the show's main character. But it wasn't always easy for those behind the camera, especially Ken Curtis, to share the limelight. As Pheezus Hagen, Curtis brought to life one of the most colorful, likable, and long-lasting sidekicks on TV. People couldn't get enough of Pheezus because of his scruffy beard, twangy voice, and rough-edged charm. Fans loved him, and some even said that his kindness and sense of humor made Dillon more likable. Pheezus was always the deputy, though. Curtis stayed in the shadow of Aries, even though the character was very famous. Dillon was known as the brave city marshal of Dodge City, but Pheezus was always Dillon's faithful friend and right-hand man. He was never in the news. That mismatch got to be too much for Curtis over time. Later, people who worked on the production would talk about how he was getting more and more angry. They said that there was an unspoken competition between the two Western icons. Aries was known for being quiet and private, so he didn't get involved in on-set fights very often. But his calm leadership made it hard for others to work with him sometimes. A lot of artists found him distant, not mean, but hard to get in touch with. Curtis often wanted more say, more recognition, and more room to make Pheezus his own because he had a lively personality and strong views. Even though they never let their differences show on TV, there was tension between the two men. Not obvious but clear. But something magical did happen when the cameras rolled. Any personal problems that were there seemed to go away, and the easy chemistry that defined Gunsmoke's golden years took their place. When Aries and Curtis worked together, they made one of the most famous teams in the history of Western TV shows. The calm marshal and his tough deputy will always be seen riding together on TV. Stephanie Blake, the fiery center of Dodge City, comes in at number 3. Amanda Blake was Miss Kitty to a lot of people. The friendly, sure of himself, and highly independent saloon owner who gave Gunsmoke its heart. She brought a unique mix of grace, grit, and vulnerability to Dodge City, right up there with James Aries's Marshal Dillon. Her fiery red hair and unwavering personality made her stand out. Fans and cast alike loved her for years and thought she was one of the show's biggest stars. They respected her strength on and off the set. With each new season, though, and as Ken Curtis's Pheezus Hagen became more popular with viewers, a different kind of energy began to spread through the Smoke camp. There were rumors going around in Hollywood that Blake and Curtis were having problems. Some sources said Amanda, who used to be the show's undisputed lead, wasn't happy with Pheezus' rising popularity. Curtis's rise may have seemed like a slow eclipse to her, taking away some of the attention she had been used to getting for a long time. Some people said the reported fight wasn't real, and was just something made up by gossip-hungry fans and magazines. Still, the stories kept coming out, painting a picture of two strong characters who hung out on set together, each watching over their own spot in Gunsmoke's world. But when the cameras started rolling, none of that stress came through. There was a lot of warmth, humor, and real love between Miss Kitty and Pheezus on film. They had a real relationship, whether they were making fun of each other over a drink at the Long Branch Saloon, or having a quiet moment to show respect for each other. So true that people could feel it. No matter if there was personal conflict between Amanda Blake and Ken Curtis, they were both consummate workers. They knew that Gunsmoke was bigger than any one of them, and they worked together to make some of the most touching and memorable Western TV scenes ever. Milburn Stone, the steady heart of Dodge City, is number 4. Soldier Stone was more than just a character to Gunsmoke fans. That person was Doc Adams, the town's moral center. He was a sharp-tongued, kind doctor. Stone helped set the tone of the show from the very first episode. The rough knowledge and quiet kindness of Marshal Dillon gave Dodge City a sense of humanity that stepped back from the lawlessness and chaos going on around him. It had been years since Ken Curtis joined the group, but Gunsmoke already had its own rhythm and hierarchy. Stone had a sense of ownership over the show because he was one of the original players. He was there during the show's growth, cast changes and rise to fame. When Fesus walked in with his crazy sense of humor and rough charm, it naturally threw off the balance that Stone had been trying to keep. Rumors quickly spread behind the scenes that the two men were having trouble getting along. Some said it began with disputes over script choices, especially when Fesus' scenes took more time away from the document. Others talked behind closed doors about having different ideas about how certain storylines should go. When it came to how their personalities were portrayed, neither actor was willing to give in. They were both deeply committed to their work. And when two strong-willed performers like Milburn Stone and Ken Curtis played together, fights were sure to happen. Even though they were different, both guys had a lot of respect for the work. No matter how tense things were between them off-screen, it never showed in their acts. In fact, a lot of fans think that the small edge, that slight push and pull between Fesus and Doc, made their relationship on screen seem so real. Their jokes seemed real. Doc's frustration, Fesus's stubborn sense of humor, and their grudging love for each other. It might have worked because it came from two experienced professionals who didn't always agree, but were devoted to the story they were telling. In the end, the way they interacted became one of the best things about Gunsmoke. This is proof of how real tension can be turned into TV magic when handled with care and professionalism. The fifth person is Dennis Weaver. The shadow that came before, even before Ken Curtis played Fesus Hagen, Gunsmoke fans all over the country fell in love with another deputy. Our man Dennis Weaver is the one who made Chester good. Chester wasn't just a helper. He had a soft draw, a signature limp, and a homey charm. The crowd saw him as family. Weaver's kindness and wit made Dodge City's softer side stand out for almost a decade, making him one of TV's most beloved figures. Fans didn't know who could replace Dennis Weaver when he left the show to go after new horizons. Then Ken Curtis rode into town. He was a scruffy newbie with a banjo, a smile, and an idea that would change Gunsmoke for good. That being said, taking on the role of a fan favorite came with a big load. Right away and for a while people couldn't help but compare Chester to Fesus. A lot of people say Curtis felt that pressure well. Weaver left a big mark on history. Fans and team members who had worked with him for a long time still whisper his name with love. A few people even whispered that Curtis might be angry, not at Weaver himself, but at the ghost of Will his memory wouldn't go away. People who were still sad about Chester's death had to earn every bit of respect, laugh, and cheer from the crowd. Ken Curtis, on the other hand, never showed that he felt pushed aside. Instead, he used grit, humor, and a strong sense of who he was to turn the task into motivation. He made Fesus Hagen into something unique and personal, a deputy like no other. Fesus was rough and had a sharp tongue, while Chester was kind and faithful. Chester stumbled through Dodge City in a nice way, but Fesus sped through it with wit and wild energy. Fans slowly stopped comparing and started having fun. It wasn't Fesus who took his place. He opened my eyes. It was over, and Ken Curtis was no longer in Dennis Weaver's shade. He had also left a legacy that will stand on its own. After Gunsmoke, Curtis's journey was still not over. He then went on to star in movies that mixed his love of music with the spirit of the wilderness. These movies perfectly showed the heart of a man who was both the singer and the cowboy. With his charm, skill, and a little Fesus magic, Ken Curtis showed that he didn't just get the part. He made a name for himself in Hollywood history. Ken Curtis kept making his mark on Hollywood as the dust from Dodge City started to settle. This time Curtis worked with John Ford, who is considered to be one of the best directors of all time. He became a known face in Ford's movies, and often appeared with Western legends like John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. It wasn't a short cameo or a background part. They were brave, memorable performances that showed how deep he is as an actor. Curtis held his own as one of the most honest and versatile actors of the frontier age, even when he was paired with Hollywood icons. But fame and money were never what he wanted. Ken Curtis didn't try to be famous like many of his friends did. He looked for the truth. He would be happy to work on smaller, lower-budget projects in between big studio outings. There were small-budget westerns and adventure movies with heart, grit, and realism that might not have won any awards. He loved playing parts like these. People with dirt on their boots and lives that were shaped by hardship. Over time, those small movies would gain dedicated fans long after people had forgotten about the big movies. But in the end, one part would be more important than everything else he had done. It would define him for generations. Faust Hagen, the makers of Gunsmoke, needed someone special in 1964. When the show was about to change, Dennis Weaver, who won America's heart for his role as Chester Good, had left the show, and it was possible that someone else could step in. Then Ken Curtis showed up. Pheesus was only supposed to show up in one episode, but as soon as he walked onto the screen with that raspy voice, scruffy beard, and sharp sense of humor, everyone fell in love with him. He had a few flaws, but he was still likable and funny. He was loyal but not perfect. Within weeks, a lot of letters came to CBS asking him to do more. What started out as a one-time job turned into something that defined her career. He became the center of Dodge City over the next 11 years and more than 300 shows. People watched not only for the gunfights and the police, but also for how kind and caring Ken was in every scene. He made Pheesus more than just a helper. He brought him to life. Ken worked hard at his job even when he wasn't on camera, with the same focus and heart. He had a lot of respect for Gunsmoke's legacy, and never called in a performance, even when shooting got hard or stories started to repeat. Some artists might get tired of being stuck with one role, but Curtis loved Pheesus very much. He often said he was proud in talks. "It made me proud to be a part of something that meant a lot to so many people." It was more than just a show for him. It showed how people live in America. Truth, respect, and the ties that connect people are at the heart of this story. But Ken's life was not easy when he wasn't in front of the cameras and surrounded by friends. Behind the man's kindness and sense of humor was someone who had been through heartbreak, loss, and quiet fights that not many people ever saw. His wife Tori was the most important thing in his life. She was both soft and strong, and she helped him find his way through the chaos of Hollywood. Their love made things better for him when things were bad. A real partnership that continued until the end of his life. Before Tori came along though, Ken's path to love was a big mess. He had been through 2 failed marriages, and each one had left its own scars. The happy cowboy that people in America loved had, in fact, been alone and hurt. Ken Curtis always handled himself with the same quiet respect that made Pheesus so well liked, even when things went wrong. He was the same kind-hearted person on and off the screen, being humble, working hard, and deeply human. The love that made Ken Curtis who he is today, and the one that saved him. Before he was known as Pheesus Hagen, and got all the praise and attention, Ken Curtis's love life was full of quiet heartbreaks and lessons that would shape him into the man he is today. Ken got married for the first time to actor Lorraine Page in 1943. Lorraine was a young woman trying to make it in Hollywood, at the same time that Ken was just getting started. They were both young and ambitious thinkers who were caught in the whirlwind of a wartime America, where everything seemed to be going by so quickly. Their love was real, but it couldn't hold up against the pull of different routes. Ken's career took off, and Lorraine found work elsewhere. They moved apart without being angry, leaving only a faint echo of what could have been. There were no kids or public problems, just 2 artists going on in peace. That's when Barbara Ford came along and brought a love story that was both grand and serious. Ken married Barbara in 1952. Barbara was the daughter of the famous director John Ford, who had given Ken a lot of help in his early work. It looked like a great idea on paper. The rising star of Western movies is marrying into the family of one of the most important people in Hollywood. But there was a huge load of expectations behind that golden picture. It was hard for Barbara Ford to grow up without her father, who was known for being intense and always wanting things to be perfect. Ken, on the other hand, was quiet, steady, and very modest. He wasn't interested in politics or fame. It was all he cared about, to do good work and be himself. For a while, they were perfect for each other. Her sophistication paired well with his earnestness. They showed two different sides of Hollywood together. One is flashy and driven, while the other is calm and sensible. But over time, as Ken's dedication to Gunsmoke grew and Barbara followed her own interests, cracks began to appear. A lot of shooting kept them apart, and the fast-paced life of fame didn't leave much time for peace. In 1964, after 12 years of marriage, they decided to split up. Two good people realized that love wasn't enough to heal the rift that had grown between them. There was no drama or a nasty fight. Ken handled the breakup with the grace and dignity that are typical of him. He kept his pain to himself and moved on with quiet strength. Things changed in 1966. In that year, Ken met Toria Hearn Connolly, the woman who would show him something he had never known before. A house, not just a house, and a peace, not just fame. Tori was not at all like the women in theater. It wasn't about the red carpet or the attention. Being real, warm, humble, and deeply kind was all that she was. She saw past the cowboy image and into the man himself from the very first time they met. Behind the rough voice and worn-out smile is a thoughtful, kind heart. Ken liked her not because she was pretty, but because she was real. She loved him for who he was when the shot was over. They built a life together that wasn't about fame but about simple pleasures like meals together, laughter that filled empty rooms, and long drives with no plan for where they were going. Even though they never had kids together, Tori brought two from her former marriage, and Ken loved them very much. He was always there for her, not just as a husband, but also as a father figure. He taught them how to be kind, humble, and know how important it is to work hard. Lessons he had learned a long time ago in the small town in Colorado, where his own story started. Later, Ken often talked about how meeting Tori was the best thing that ever happened to him. With her he found balance again. The regular beat of love and life that fame had thrown off so often. It was her advice that he slow down, enjoy the quiet times, and keep in mind that there was a whole world out there ready to be lived. Once Gunsmoke was over, Tori became his true north. They took road trips across the country, quiet fishing trips, and small-town festivals where Fesus was still welcomed by fans like an old friend. They did this not for fame or attention, but just for fun. Ken Curtis found more than love in Tori.